Welcome, everyone. Hey, Alex. Hey, good to see you, Alex. Hey,
Morning, Alex.
hey, David.
There you go. All good to see you, mate.
Yeah, good to see you, mate.
Hi, David.
Hey, Rowan.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, mate. Good. Hey, Karen. Ben, good to see you. John.
Hey guys.
Good afternoon, Brad. Good afternoon, everyone.
Hey, great to see you. Hey, Trevor. Great to see you, mate. We had
G'day, Brad.
Hey, mate. Great to see you. Hey, Frank. It's quite coincidental having yourself on after Trevor. I had Trevor from Viscount Plastic on. He's on with us now. And he was talking about how he got bottom up with his team. So it's really, really good timing. So everyone, I'll stop this music now, and I'll be able to just let people in as we go, and then we'll kick in. Everyone, this is a conversation that I've been really looking forward to. I've had the privilege. I'm just going to stop the share now. I've had the privilege of being able to sit with Frank and have these conversations already, and I'm so glad that you get to today because it's truly unique what Frank does with organizations. And I've got to admit, Frank, I didn't fully know about it until we spoke on the podcast, and then I read your book. So, yeah, but it blew me away. I think I've become Frank's PR manager in Australia because I know a lot of our community has Frank's books. So I was telling Frank earlier that I was doing a book launch for myself with the book Leading Excellence. And I mentioned Frank. I said, look, if you want to look at bottom up culture change and rapid, like read this book. And then like half the people on the call put up Frank's book. That was quite comical. But it's truly good to see because I think we can learn so much from it. And I'm going to open up today with a question to Frank, but everyone, this is going to be a conversation. So please, as you listen to Frank's story and think of questions, please feel free to drop it in chat or just put up your hand and I'll, the hand on the Zoom call, and I'll play the facilitator to help bring questions in because this is different. So I guarantee you'll have questions. So I'm gonna kick off with a question just to get us going. So Frank, you've created this technique, to create rapid mass engagement and a rapid culture of CI and cultural improvement, and it's truly bottom up. But how did you in your career, mate, go from? I know you were connected to Lean for a long time, but how did you get to this place where you've created this unique approach to culture change and performance?
Essentially, it was because of frustration about the traditional methodologies. And what I found earlier in my career was that I was successful, inverted commas, because I got promoted rapidly for making change. But when I look back on where I'd left, it was often not sustained. And that made me realize that I hadn't actually been successful.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. See you. Yeah, bye.
Yeah. What I'd been doing is I'd been making change that was heavily dependent on a small number of very energetic people. And when that group inevitably got promoted out of the site, away from the factory, the roots, the sustainability of what we'd done weren't strong enough. It never went back to where it was before, but the continuous improvement of what we'd started stalled. So I started looking for, is there other ways of doing this? And eventually came to the conclusion that no matter how good leaders are, no matter how charismatic they are, no matter how hardworking they are, no matter how dedicated they are, there just isn't enough of us to do that. We need a much bigger coalition of the people inside an organization pushing this boulder up the hill and keeping it going. And then that got me into looking at techniques for engaging large groups of people, big groups, and how to do that in practice, and how to create large scale and deep engagement for what the organization was trying to do from the workforce itself. And the advantage of that one of the many advantages that workforces don't tend to turn over as quickly as senior management do. So often, the people in the local location will stay there and they will be there. So this issue of being promoted off the site. Now, a lot of good people do get promoted off the site, but if you have enough people, who are absolutely dedicated to this, and you train them very well to be facilitators and in the kind of so-called leadership skills. So for example, in a number of my clients, we train the entire workforce how to give recognition, coach, and to give constructive feedback. And in some cases, do some of the other leadership skills. So if we see it as a non-hierarchical, widely dispersed, semi-democratic set of skills, rather than a hierarchical, only leaders learning this stuff approach, then we'll make progress. So that's how it started. Frustrated as hell, feeling guilty, thinking I'm not as smart as I thought I was, kind of stuff, leading to constant experimentation. And eventually, even rapid mass engagement itself has improved as we've gone through, as we've reflected on what worked incredibly well, what didn't work so well, what might have been accidentally counterproductive. And I can give you practical examples of those learnings if anyone's interested. But that's essentially how it happened. You play,
it's amazing.
You play games. Yeah, you play games against top teams and they hammer you and you realize you're not as good a player as you think you are. So you have to improve what you're doing. It is as a sporting analogy.
Yeah, it's too true. Well, I think what I'd probably ask the question on, Frank, is we might get into the process that you follow for it that actually creates it. And then everyone, please think of questions through this process bit, because this is where it gets really different. This is where this is unique. So, Frank, do you mind describing the process that you take to shift the culture with rapid mass engagement? Also, to probably, I know you're very humble, but please mention one or two of the companies that you're doing this with, you've done this with too. But yeah, maybe describe one of them practically that you actually did it with.
Yeah.
And sort of also, I'm keen to know how you first ran that experiment, because I'm keen to know about that, because it would have been, it's different. I'll hand over to you, Frank.
Yeah. Well, the essentially, to go to the process, it starts with what I call a diagnostic and decision-making event for the senior leadership team of whatever system you're trying to optimize. Now, I say system rather than site or location because what we're trying to do here is optimize a system, and sometimes different systems are present in the same location. So, for example, Rolls-Royce grew out of Derby in the UK, but because of the age of the business, the location has different divisions within Rolls-Royce, co-located sometimes in the same buildings. So you have to decide, what system are we trying to optimize here? So where's the border of the people who we want to be massively engaged in making whatever changes are required? And for just to give you a practical example, if you had a group of people who are not connected to what you're trying to do, but just happen to be on the site, then they'll find it very difficult to get engaged in lots of conversations about issues that don't affect them. They're going on around them, but they don't affect their day-to-day work. So first thing is to decide with a senior team, which system are you trying to optimize? And then what I do is I get the senior guys, not the most senior person, I ask them to be quiet, to explain their vision, their objectives, what they're trying to do. And I act as a semi-intelligent outsider on the basis that if I don't understand their strategy and their approach, then what the hell chance has the workforce got of understanding it? And what that does is that flushes out gaps in the strategy, gaps in the alignment of the senior team. So you can have members of the senior team who are kind of passively nodding along with a small group of people who do really buy into what they're trying to do. And that's a problem. So if there's not sufficient alignment, or if there's a values disconnect within the senior team, I will say to them they're not ready to do this. So more often than not, that's the case, that they're not fully ready, and the extent to which they're ready varies. It's very situational. One guy quoted in the book from Coca-Cola, we sat down and said, your team's not strong enough to do this. It hasn't got the skills. It hasn't got the capability, and for these reasons. Anyway, he quietly listened to the feedback, and about 14 months later, he rang me up and said, hey, Frank, do you remember you said my team wasn't ready? Yeah, well, I've got another team. So
Right.
he'd replaced half of his team, and the others had improved, and then we went for it, and that's exactly the reaction. But I won. But it's not always the reaction I get. Sometimes people are insulted when I say you're not ready. Sometimes they, become alienated. So I need to improve my political skills, maybe, in how to pass over that message. But so sometimes you don't get the right reaction. So one particular organization, I won't mention it because it doesn't reflect well on them. They wanted me to do rapid mass engagement across the entire world in all their locations. And when I was patiently explaining that it's not something you can roll out because it's unique to the particular system, and you can't just replicate, you have to create. The workforce essentially creates it with alongside senior management and everyone else in the system. They weren't happy with that. They wanted it to be much quicker. They wanted it to be like a normal kind of top-down rollout. So that demonstrated to me that they didn't really understand it. And I said, look, what I'll do is we'll do it in one site, in one country, and we'll learn the lessons from that. And then maybe we'll be ready to do a second, and then maybe a third, but I'm not, I don't think it's sensible to try and do more than that because of the sheer intensity of the process, etc. And also you learn from what works and what doesn't work, and different organizations are different. Corporate attitudes are different. The amount of autonomy within a site is different from corporate. And one of the big things from my own corporate career is the way in corporate we can value neatness, whereas at local level the unique culture, history, legislation, preferences of the people in an organization massively matter. There's a quote in the book from a site where a senior group were walking around and they saw the behavioral standards, which is the codification of the new culture designed by the workforce and senior management working together. And they said to the factory operator, oh, these are great behavioral standards. We're going to roll them out when we go back to our factories. And the shop floor employee just looked at them and said, if you think you can roll these out, we haven't explained how they were created to you properly. So that differentiation locally, whichever, that ownership, that uniqueness of each individual site is one of the key factors that we discuss in that first step. So once the senior leadership agrees what it's going to do, and it may not be rapid mass engagement, and it's often not exactly the same as anyone else that's done rapid mass engagement, but it has to meet certain criteria. And one of the most important ones is that the strength of the engagement and the improvement process has to match the ambition of the objectives of the organization. What I frequently come across is very ambitious objectives and feeble implementation methodology, which has very little or no chance of achieving those objectives. And that disconnect can be uncomfortable for a senior team, because they then realize through the that day that a lot of the plans they've made are just not going to be strong enough to get the level of engagement they need. Now, in some organizations, they don't require as much engagement as others, and therefore it is feasible to do things which are not as strong as rapid mass engagement, and I help them figure out what their options are. But when mostly the people who approach me are wanting to do, they're wanting to either gain or sustain competitive advantage against the best in the world. So they're looking to do very ambitious things. Or at the other end of the spectrum, they're facing massive challenges. So a factory was going to be closed if a strike had gone ahead. The owners had a one strike close factory policy in practice, and the strike had got something like 90-something% support. So that's where we were. And by the end of 2 weeks, we had a jointly agreed change plan, which kept the organization open and made the cuts in the workforce. So the workforce itself worked with senior management in how to reduce its own numbers, which was necessary because of the situation, and which proves that this idea that Turkish don't vote for Christmas. Turkeys will vote for Christmas if they believe in Christmas enough, and that there's a number of examples of that. So it's either Boston Scientific, already the best site in the whole company, wanting to go even further ahead of the competition, or sites like that where they're facing possible closure. So, but not usually appropriate in what I would call fat and happy organizations. So where there's no real penalty for poor performance. So the one attempt in the public sector that I tried severely sub-optimized because there was no real urgency to make the improvement. There was, even if they got it wrong, there'd be no consequence, no accountability, if you like, and that creates complacency. And this process is not for complacent organizations or people. It's just, why would you do this if there wasn't a really good reason for doing it, if you see what I mean?
And Frank, with the process, like, I know that you start the senior leadership and make sure that they're aligned and they're capable and they've got a vision, direction, purpose, and that they're a team and they've got the capability to lead this. And then you go into the front.
And Brad, that's done in 1 day.
Nice.
Yeah.
And then you go to the front line and we're running this small group exploration of ideal behaviors. And you told a tale to me on the podcast as to why this works, is because you mentioned to me how, like in a Coca-Cola site, there is often a different purpose or even different cultural aspects to a site in Western Ireland to what you've got in say
London.
London. Yeah. You mind explaining that? Because I thought that was quite pertinent when we try to roll out a one thing suits all type approach versus this.
Well, if you think about the Boston Scientific was the west of Ireland, which was the part of Ireland that's produced the most emigration as a proportion of the population after the famine in the 1840s. So I would imagine a high proportion of the Australians with Irish names probably came from that part of Ireland, And I support all them in the Olympics, by the way. So when Kennedy was doing her pole vaulting yesterday, I just imagined that the colours were Irish colours, even though she was doing it for Australia. But now in that kind of situation, there's a deep cultural understanding of how families are devastated by children having to emigrate. Like me, I had to emigrate from Ireland. I didn't choose to. I didn't have a choice to stay. And so that makes it relatively more easy for a workforce to buy into in a higher purpose. One of the parts of their higher purpose that we created was a future for our family and friends in the West, meaning in the west of Ireland. In other words, We want to create jobs so that our kids don't have to emigrate. They might choose for career reasons to move, but they don't have to leave. And when I walked around that site, we created a whole new factory was built next to that site to accommodate the extra work and the extra employees. And so more than 1,000 jobs were created on that site after the rapid mass engagement. Now, correlation, causation, disclaimer, without the massively good leadership team, competing for inward investment and all the rest of it, rapid mass engagement on its own wouldn't have done that. It's rapid mass engagement is kind of a trigger that sets off a whole series of other things, but it does take other people to pick up the ball and run with it. So in Galway, that was really easy. People could understand it. When I'm walking around talking to them, they talk to me about it in the canteen, in the corridors. Now, if you're in North London, the majority of the workforce will be traveling into the site from quite a distance. They won't hang about in the local community and have shared interests in creating jobs in that particular part of London. They won't be staying back after work to give back to the community, because their communities are spread all over the place. There was also a diversity in a unhelpful way, in that there were local crime gangs. There was tension between different ethnic communities. So in that particular setting, it was much harder to create that sense of we're all in this together. This is about our community, our kids, our schools, our local shops, our charities, etc., etc. Practically, if people are driving for an hour and a half after work, they haven't got the same energy to devote to the immediate locality. So the demographic and travel to work issues differ. And where you have a community, and where you have an integrated community, and people are engaging with each other naturally outside work, it's easier. And when they're dispersed, it's harder. And there's a continuum there. And you just have to. So with Coca-Cola, we had to put, in that particular plant in Coca-Cola, we had to put different things in place to compensate for the fact that we couldn't rely on the natural community spirit that you could say in a place like Galway. So all of these factors are taken into account when designing what's the most appropriate, what's the best option for a particular system at a particular time. So that's why you can't just copy what's done in one place and say, we're going to do it here. It's useful to learn from others, and I encourage people to talk to people who've done it before, what the learning is, etc., etc. Especially talk to the employees as well as the senior management about how it felt for them. But it's not a copy and paste. Each system is unique. The history is unique. The culture is unique. What comes out from the workforce is unique, although there are certain very common themes that seem to occur nearly always.
And Frank, just with everyone, like when Frank talks systems, when you talk systems theory, it's that an organization is a system of interconnected systems. And one of those systems is, of course, the people system. So what Frank's saying is that the people system and all the systems of Galway is different to North London. It's a different system just by nature of. Sorry, Frank.
And just within that Galway site, they have a new product development organization which reports directly into the US, and they share the site. So we had to do a separate rapid mass engagement for them, because their issues were different, and the things they taught their customers were all the factories in the globe, because they were supplying the supply chain everywhere. So they were interacting with different people. They had different experiences. So their set of behavioral standards, their change plan, everything was different. What we did there was we integrated the leadership approach. So having differentiated the issues and the change plan, we then integrated the leadership approach so that leaders could fluidly move from one part of the organization to the other. And they're the kind of practical things that leadership groups will work out, facilitated by me. What's the best way of doing it? Traditionally, what would have happened there is, because the second group was so small and the first group was so big, if we hadn't have differentiated, the issues from the small group, which were unique to them, would not have made it to the big consensus day decision-making event, because not enough people would have nominated them in the employee groups to get them through. So we had to take them out so that their unique issues would raise to the top in their process. So that's two different rapid mass engagements back to back on the same site, and then integrating them afterwards.
And Frank, if we chat about the process to do that, because I understand the artifacts are a number of ideal behaviors or behavioral standards that we define ourselves, and potentially the purpose. And then there's also the impediments or the challenges we're facing to moving forward. Do you mind explaining, Frank, how those events happen, that you're engaging the front line at these sites to formulate that, and then how it rolls up?
The key thing is that you want to challenge the thinking of the entire workforce as you go through the process. So effectively, you're creating a high performance culture in the way in which you engage the workforce. So it's like buy one, get one free approach. So although we're doing things in the workshops and they have tangible outcomes, like what are the main obstacles or to achieving whatever we're trying to achieve, what behavioral data do we need to create the new culture, and who's going to represent us with senior management when all the decisions are made in a room. That's called consensus day. They're the kind of visible side of this, but invisible to people is the care in which the groups are put together. So groupthink is a real problem in general, and social media makes it worse. Echo chamber stuff. So what the makeup of each individual group is very diverse. So you'll have people from different functions. You'll have, if you like, white collar, blue collar people. The only lack of diversity you have there is we don't put managers in with the workforce. They have their own workshops where they can talk frankly away from the workforce, and when the workforce can talk frankly away from management. So at that stage, that early stage, we keep management and the employees separate in those workshops. We bring them back together again in consensus day. And if there's a trade union involved, they have their own workshop, because their issues are different. They can see, it's natural for them to see a very powerful direct connection between the organization and its employees as a threat to the indirect model of trade union organization. So being sensitive to the fact that trade unions will naturally be defensive about this means create a separate workforce for them. And my own trade union kind of background, early idealistic, when I was 18, 19, 20, 21, I was a senior relay trade union. Sorry? Was a question, did I miss a question there? Sorry. Oh yeah, there's someone got their hand up. Do we take that, Brad?
You're on mute, Brad.
Guys, I think we've got a question here. I don't know if Bob, did you have a question you wanted to ask, Bob? Or?
No, I didn't. Just a fat finger, Brad.
Sorry, no drama, mate. There is a question, Frank, from David. David, I might let you ask it directly, mate, because you do have that complexity in your organisation, David. So I'll let you go on that, mate.
Sure, no worries. Thank you, Brad. G'day, Frank. Thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon. when you talk systems, I'm automatically trying to
Yes.
picture our individual business, and I work for a disability organisation that probably has about 15 different profit centers and probably collectively 8 or 9 different industries that we operate in. When you talk systems,
Yes.
what are your key differentiating points to what is is a system? How do you differentiate a system? What is your key decision points? I think is
Yeah.
probably the easiest way to ask that question.
The key thing is codependency. So the people in my system have an effect on my work, and I have an effect on their work in some way. So if I do something over here, does it have an effect over there? If the answer to that is yes, then we need to align what we're doing. Ideally, we need the same culture. We need to know how we raise issues with each other. We need to be equally skilled in having these discussions and debates around issues. So, what can happen in some organizations is that you can have within the same building, you can have people who don't have any connection with each other whatsoever. They just by reason of office space utilization, they happen to be in the same location, but they don't have any impact on each other. They report into different places. They have different customers, if you like, and artificially putting them together would be disengaging for them because the conversation would be about topics that are not relevant to them. So they would get bored very rapidly. So that's the kind of factor. So when I'm dealing with a senior team, I'm getting them to think, are we dealing with one system here, or are there different systems? And essentially the senior team will decide these people are close enough together that we want them to be aligned. Sometimes that's the entire site or the entire unit or the entire division. Sometimes the entire function for global corporate functions. They have enough in common, even though they're dispersed all over the world. For example, the quality function, that it's useful for them to have their own culture and their whole way of doing things. And so they're the kind of factors that come into play here. But ultimately, the organization itself, facilitated by me, decides what that is. And the other issue on that is what needs to be integrated and what needs to be differentiated. So if you've got lots of different locations, lots of different industries, it may be that certain things like the values that you espouse and all of that should be integrated, but there could be specific industry specific issues which would have to be differentiated.
So you can have multiple systems that then engage into one overarching system. Is that what you?
The thing is because you're creating the culture, the high performance culture, you do need integrating systems. What I mean by integrating mechanisms. So if I use McDonald's, the fast food chain, as an example, rather than talking theoretically, if you go into a McDonald's in India, you won't get the same food as you'll get in Australia. All right. And the reason is that people have different food tastes. But what you will get is you'll get a very guaranteed speed and lack of differentiation in terms of the quality of the food. So the mechanisms for cooking and delivering the food will be the same, but the actual menu will be different because people have different tastes. So thinking about what we integrate and what we differentiate is important. What organizations normally do is, give you an example, Johnson & Johnson in recent years, one of my clients, they've had a couple of scandals, one to do with baby powder, and the other to do with replacement hips. One in the US, and I forget where the other one was. But anyway, the reaction of the organization at top level was to integrate. Their analysis was we allowed too much freedom for local managers to make decisions, and now we end up with these bloody big legal cases, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to tighten everything. Well, if you over integrate, what happens is very, very highly capable leaders don't like working in an over integrated situation. They like autonomy. They like to be able to differentiate locally. If you prevent them doing that, they'll go and join other companies. And one of the advantages I had in Boston Scientific was that some very, very senior people left Johnson & Johnson because of this and joined Boston Scientific. So they knew this rapid mass engagement worked because of their experience in Johnson & Johnson. But that typically what happens is an overreaction to a problem leads to either over integration or over differentiation, and then over a period of time, the bad effects of knee jerking in the other direction becomes apparent. I have a friend who's a consultant who doesn't share my value space. He's still a nice guy, but I put my hand in my head when I speak to him what he does. And what he essentially does is he goes into the same clients every 5 years and just reverses what he did 5 years ago. So when the issues of too much differentiation are happening, he makes them very integrated. He just sits back and waits because he knows in 5 years' time the problems of that will arise and the managers will have changed, and he comes back in and reverses what he did 5 years ago. So he gets paid an awful lot more money than I do for going in reversing what he did 5 years ago with his clients. That's how, I advocate you get the senior team figures out what the optimum balance, what they're going to integrate, what they're going to differentiate from the beginning, and doesn't knee jerk from side to side every 5 years. I think it's a much more sensible but less lucrative approach to all of this.
But it's probably a good example as to why certain organizations are restructuring every 12 to 18 months.
Yeah.
So it would be a common factor that would occur. And not to say that your friend's going to every organization and restructuring every 18 months, but the concept.
Usually about 5 years. Yeah.
the systems integrating, leaders changing, and then it not.
Yeah.
So thank you for the answer. I appreciate it. Thanks, Brad.
In terms of back to where we were on the flow, these initial workshops are very diverse. So you've got people from all these different groups. So when they have to agree what are the biggest obstacles in their site or whatever, it prevents people saying, my issue in my area is the biggest issue. So you're trying to get them to look at the whole organization and say, for our organization in total, what are the biggest obstacles to achieving that? And that forces people to think outside of their own experience in their own department, their own function, think more strategically, and become more humble and more interested in all the other issues that are going on represented in the room with them. So that's the design of the actual workshop itself. And it's the entire workforce. So I'm doing one in America next week. Sorry, the week after next for 10 days. And the entire workforce will go through those 3 workshops a day. So on time of about 12, 14 hours every day, because it's intensive. And that momentum, so let's put it out to the group. If you can create an agreed change plan with the entire workforce and the senior team by consensus and codify a whole new high performance culture from the bottom up, and you can do that within 10 days, what message does that give to the employees about, if you like, senior management?
What thoughts do we got, everyone? Bottom up, defining basically culture and also impediments organization wide, because we're using cross-functional small teams. And then within 10 days, you've got that culture defined bottom up.
I mean, 10 days is a very short time frame. So if you pull that off, I would say it sends a very strong message that you're serious about it.
Yeah. Now you can only do it in 10 days. Yeah. You can only do it in 10 days if the workforce is relatively small. To get 3,200 people through 3 workshops a day took something like 7 weeks. So it depends on the size, but it sends a strong message. Any other messages it's sending to employees, guys?
What other thoughts have we got, everyone, on this sort of fast motion approach, bottom up?
Well, maybe that it's necessary that we move fast because there's an urgency sort of required for change.
Just building on that one, who is that? I couldn't see who that was. I haven't got my glasses on.
That was Jan.
That's Jan. Yeah. Well, one of the things I ask in the workshop is, when you raise an issue with management, how long do you wait for an answer?
Yeah.
And the answer I often get is forever. Sometimes it might be like 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks. But often employees have a tendency to exaggerate in their responses to that question. But I do get forever. So when you do it so rapidly, that's the rapid bit. It certainly sends a message that you're serious about what you're trying to do. This is different. Yeah.
I think it's also showing them that they matter and their opinions matter, and they're going to be the drivers of that change. Because if you tell them that they're going to get that change in 10 days, I think that's an incredibly similar to Jan's point. It's incredibly empowering to be made important when potentially they may never have been asked some of those questions before. So I think it would be very empowering.
And you've touched on a really important difference between involvement and engagement. They're not just being asked. That's involvement. Management asks employees for stuff, and then they take it away. But management makes the decisions. In rapid mass engagement, the employees select the best of their peers to go and represent them in a consensus day, and that event actually makes the decisions. So the decisions as to what the change plan is created by a group of people, overwhelmingly employees, with a small minority of senior managers in the room, also part of the consensus. So that's what I mean by engagement. So I don't know Australia well enough, but did you inherit the traditional British breakfast? I know the barbecues are important and everything, but the traditional British breakfast is eggs and bacon. And the difference between involvement and engagement is that the chickens are involved, but the pigs are deeply engaged, and we need more pigs in that sense in creating this. They have to have skin in the game massively.
So, Frank, what I think that's the main questions at the minute. Jan, I'll let you say, Jan, did you have any more questions, mate, on well, Jan, you were leaning onto a path I was going to do on, which is the leadership management part. Do you mind, Jan, just mentioning your question there about, what part for management to play?
Well, yeah, so obviously, like you mentioned, bottom up, it can be very challenging for the leadership to sort of let it all go and let it happening. So you've done quite a few of those exercises now. What have you learned that could help us to strengthen bottom up involvement, even bottom up leadership? Because like I said, involvement, engagement, leadership, it's sort of all connected, but it takes quite a bit of guts, from senior leadership actually to step back and actually listen to what the employees have to say and where they want to go with it.
Would you remember the earlier point where you actually create the culture by the way in which you do the process?
Yes,
so the culture is already changing. So to give you an example of that, after about 10 workshops in one location, very big location, the catering staff were not involved in the process because they were contractors. But they could see something was going on, and myself and my co-facilitator, because we were doing such big groups to get the momentum, I had a second facilitator helping me. We sat down for a cup of tea between workshops, And the manager of the canteen staff approached me, and she said, Frank, my staff have come to me about what you're doing. And, you know, being a man of a certain age and the staff being predominantly young women, nowadays you get kind of worried. Have you said something that might have caused offense? So she kept an absolute straight face. And so I, you know, earnestly sat down and said, oh, do tell me, you know, what's the problem? So I was catastrophizing, okay? And she said, well, the staff have said to me, whatever you're doing in those workshops, could you please continue doing it? Mm. And I asked, well, why are they saying that? She said, well, people have stopped going through the tills with on their phone now. They put their phone away. They're engaging with us, talking to us, saying thank you as they go through the till. They're treating us like human beings rather than vending machines. Mm. And now that was only some way through the process. So the way in which the process is arranged subtly is actually just sensitizing the entire workforce about the importance of respect, eye contact in that case, seeing the good in other people, just in having the discussions before you gather the actual technical data and then technically put it together into the codification of the new culture. So that's what's kind of going on. So the behavior of me, the behavior of senior leaders, and you were saying about listening, a group of senior leader comes into the last half an hour before the end of any workshop, and their instructions are to listen to the feedback from the workshop, not to debate the issues. The debate in the issues comes when all the issues have been prioritized in the consensus day, simply to humbly listen and understand. And one guy told me afterwards he had half a bottle of brandy at home, having listened to the night shift, and he polished off the entire half a bottle of brandy because he had no idea some of the things that had been going on because it hadn't been reported to him. And the company had to send a car to pick him up because he would have been over the alcohol that he couldn't have been in. And that was one of the directors, right? So, and he saw this as a sign of success. Not that he measured it in terms of how much he drank when he went home. And so that's what you're essentially doing. And it's not just listening. Power, and this is where employees are very skeptical, sometimes cynical early on. You're giving employees power within guardrails. The senior team decides the higher purpose, what we're trying to achieve. Now, ideally, socializes that wider than just the senior team. I recommend that. But that's what they do. They agree what we're going to do, how many workshops we're going to have, the mechanics, what the higher purpose is, what the employees are going to think about, what's stopping us getting there. That's defined usually by the senior team. In very small organizations, what we've done is we've actually defined that with the entire workforce, because we could get the entire workforce in the room at the same time, because we only had maybe 100 people. So we could do that with a group of 100. You couldn't do that with a group of 1,000 employees, but you can. Around about 100 would be the design limits for that process. But that's what they hand over power to decide what are the major obstacles, which creates the agenda, which then creates the change plan. They hand over power over who decides, you know, who's going to be there on the day, you know, which employees are going to be in the room with senior management. That power is given to the workforce. And the power of what's going to be in the codification of new culture, the behavioral data, they're given the power to create that. And then from the cumulative effect of all that behavioral data, including the senior team's behavioral data, all of that is codified into the new culture. And that's why behavioral standards read differently from a set of values. And if people are interested, that distinction between, you know, values on the one hand and behavioral standards on the other is key to understanding this.
Frank, do you mind describing that, mate? Like, and I don't know if I'm throwing a spanner in the works with this too, mate, but I'd love to get your view on values,
versus
behavioral
behavior.
standards,
Yeah.
but also
Well,
can I throw a spanner in the works and say also principles, which we know is
yeah,
the language out of the Shinguns Institute?
yes, and I understand. I understand the. So why did I call them standards, not principles? Well, if I first of all explain why the frustration I had with values, which led me to try and create a different approach, which I call behavioral standards, and then I'll explain why behavioral principles isn't a strong enough message. So if I do it in that order, for years in corporate life, I was a big believer in having values and corporate values. The problem was holding people accountable to them. If you're dealing with senior people, they're bright, they're intelligent, and if their behaviors are not aligned with the values, they're bright and intelligent enough to argue that they are. So you get into like blame versus accountability, and people are saying, well, Frank, I wasn't blaming them, I'm holding them accountable. So you get into the Humpty Dumpty frustrating debates about the meaning of words. What do we mean by blame? What do we mean by accountability? So in one of the sites, blame was a massive issue because employees were marched off the job if they made a mistake, and they had to work their way back. So they were, if you like, found guilty, then went to trial, and when found innocent, they were then allowed to get their job back. And you can imagine the effect that had on employees willing to own up to quality issues and expose quality issues and therefore get them fixed. So their first behavioral standard that they created, and just think about this, that a behavioral standard has to be either binary or measurable. So it's either on or off, yes or no, binary, or there's some way of measuring it. And their behavioral standard to deal with this blame issue, and the first one to show you its significance, was when something goes wrong. So do you notice it's very specific? It's not saying generically like values talk about. When something goes wrong in those circumstances, we ask, what happened? Why did it happen? How do we make sure that doesn't happen again? And we don't ask, who did it? And clearly, when you're asking what happened, and the answer is somebody couldn't be bothered to do a quality check, then that does carry accountability. But it's the philosophical or spiritual starting point that we think continuous improvement all the time. We're looking for root cause. We're looking for why never again. And if that's built into every time everything goes wrong for everybody at every level, could you imagine the effect that has on a workforce and on its management? So that's why I created behavioral standards. Now, behavioral principles was a contender, Brad. And I thought about this, and my own question to myself was, how many times do we want to get this wrong? So if it's a principle, we're sending a message that these are guiding principles. They're kind of light touch. But I think we need to be a bit more assertive than that. I think we need to show leadership intent. When I was involved in Unilever, because of an infection in a factory, about 5 old age pensioners died in a nursing home. And the response was to take all the toilets, because it was traced back to hand washing standards, to take all the toilets physically out of the factories, put them in separate buildings, and have a camera controlled entrance to all the buildings, and make it gross misconduct if anyone walked into a building without washing their hands. So that kind of, and we had to fire a few managers to make the point that killing our customers is not acceptable. And if we take that attitude to hospital-acquired infections, for example, then there'll be a lot fewer hospital-acquired infections. If we take that attitude to illiteracy coming out of the school system, innumeracy coming out of the school system, then our school systems would perform much higher. So my view was that we need to signal when we're really, really serious about stuff, as opposed to an aspiration that we'd like to get there. Now, we can have aspirations, but if employees don't know the difference between those two things, and I remember a famous airplane crash where the standard was they had to tighten the bolt a certain number of times to make sure, because it was the tail flap, and you can't fly a plane without the tail flap, and under pressure, the subcontracting maintenance guys didn't tighten the bolts tightly enough. So every time the plane took off and landed and flying, etc., they were getting looser and looser and looser, and it took the plane down. And the reason was, when it was investigated, that the guys didn't fully realize that was absolutely essential, that you tighten it to that level. This is a long time ago. We've got better ways of doing that now. But the point was, if employees don't know what you're serious about and what's just an aspiration, under pressure, time, get work done, costs, whatever it is, they will sometimes compromise in the very areas which would be devastating to compromise. And you don't want that. So you need to signal, we're serious about X. These other things are targets. Yeah, we'd like to get there, but we're really, really serious about this relatively small number of things.
I think
so
that's
why it was standards rather than principles, Brett.
I think the powerful thing too, Frank, with calling it a standard, like you're saying, is all the employees have been involved in creating it. So there's been this whole high involvement in them creating it. And of course, then the accountability is a lot easier to take, isn't it? Because I came up with that standard, and now I'm accountable to the standard, which is the other power of that bottom-up approach to creating it.
Even within the workshops, we break them into small groups, because you could potentially get somebody saying, well, the workshop decided that, but I didn't say anything. It's not my culture, right? So I anticipate all the excuses people can give for not buying into something, and put something into design to eliminate that. So it's kind of poka-yoke for excuses. And so in the workshops, we break them down into very small groups. If you're in a group of 3, it's very hard not to say anything when 2 of your peers are looking at you and asking you what you think. So breaking them down into very, very small groups, for example, means that nobody can say, I didn't create these standards. No excuses.
It's great. It's great. Well, Frank and everyone, we're coming to the end of the hour, and Frank, I really appreciate the knowledge and insights. And everyone, Frank, how can people get hold of your book and gain more information if they want to, mate?
I understand that it's now available in Australia, from what you tell me, on Amazon and stuff. But you know something,
it was sold out a week ago, but it should be back in stock now.
You know something that would be better, because the small book trade struggles to compete with Amazon and stuff. So if you have a local bookshop or whatever, you might have to wait a little bit longer, but you're keeping those little businesses going. So, I always say to people, buy it in a small bookstore if you can. And there's something about walking into a bookstore and just looking at books. You never know, you probably come out with 4 books.
Too true.
How do we decide who wins the book, Brad?
Well, I think I'm going to get Emily to do that, everyone. So I'll get Em at the end of the event to decide on that. And I'll let you all know in email after this, everyone. And Frank, I'll supply the book out of Australia, mate. So don't you worry about it. You can buy me a beer when you're out here, or when I'm in the UK.
Excellent. So that's a good deal, actually.
Yeah. Well, and Frank, I appreciate the time and the knowledge. It's over and above. everyone, I think, the community is all about helping each other learn, and we learn from each other. And this is such a unique approach. So that's why I'm so pleased, Frank. Thank you so much for helping us. And
listen, guys, link in on LinkedIn
sorry,
as well, because I put stuff on LinkedIn, might be interesting, and reach out anytime about any of this stuff. We might be a long way away, and but with modern technology, we can do all sorts of things. So, and I'm not like a lawyer. I don't charge for stuff. I'm happy to help people. Most people I help, we don't have a commercial relationship. Just this stuff makes a difference to people, communities, and keeps jobs, creates jobs. So reach out anytime. Delighted to talk about this stuff.
Yeah, and everyone too. I've got a purpose over the next little while. I do want to get Frank out to Australia to work with someone. So if anyone knows of an organisation or anything where you're like, this could help, let us know, because we'll look to get Frank out and because I'd like to learn. I'd like to see you in action, Frank. So that's sort of a pet goal I've got of myself over the coming time. And everyone too, please, just one final note. There's a shameless plug. The Leading Excellence book launch is happening late in August. That's Chris Butterworth, myself, Stephen Dargan. I will be mentioning Frank's book in those events too, because Frank, of course, we've written the cascading approach a lot, So I always go, hey, please note there's rapid mass engagement to get the bottom up approach, So that's where I use it, Yeah. So thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Frank.
Thanks, Frank. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Hey, guys.
Yeah, everyone. Bye for now.
Yeah, that's very good.